My team and I were hired to investigate the old Ironwood Graveyard in the town of Ironmills. There were four of us, and we were all trained in investigating ghosts. Maria was our technical expert and the one who was going to set up the cameras, EMF meters, and audio recorders before we examined the evidence with her computer. Damien was our expert on local lore and also myself. My role was to examine local history and what we found, to see if I could draw the necessary connections to what happened before. If there wasn't someone who knew about local history, it generally made us look bad, but also not knowing history generally doomed us to repeat it. Set was our resident ghost expert. Supposedly, he studied for years and spent even more years investigating ghosts. I say supposedly because once we were investigating a supposedly haunted orchestra, and he was convinced it was being haunted by a demon that was making the violin play without being touched. Turned out it was a spider that thought the strings were the web of a prospective female, so the spider was playing the strings, making the haunting melody. Still, though, we had to have a complete team. And then there was Psyche, our psychic. The name is definitely an aptronym, but honestly, she was very successful in her investigations. She found us not just evidence that no one else found, but more than once she found us skeletons in the closet. Sometimes, literally. Our luck, we may be able to find something going on in the old Ironwood cemetery. Ironmills was, of course, an iron mine within the kingdom of Vespucci. So the town was built around the mine, and even though the town has other features other than the iron mine, it was still a mining town. It produced enough iron and steel that the town was excluded from the draft, despite the war with the Seven Cities back east. Still, though, the town wasn't free from tragedy. There was a major mine collapse less than 40 years ago, and even with modern equipment, the miners were still digging up bodies trying to get deeper and deeper iron veins. However, it wasn't the iron mine we were investigating, but the Ironwood Cemetery. It was quiet most of the town's history, but over the last few months there were odd things occurring in the cemetery. Ghostly orbs appearing in the cemetery, odd noises at all hours, flames that would appear and disappear without warning. Electronics would go haywire within the graveyard, and they even sent the town's priest to investigate and bless the graveyard. When he came back the next day, he was covered in itchy red marks along his skin. Those marks soon started peeling, and his skin followed. The priest was dead before the end of the day, and now the entire town was terrified of what was happening in the graveyard. This was a problem for several reasons, but not including the fact it was the only graveyard in town, so they would have to keep sending bodies outside of the town. And supernatural occurrences were starting to occur at a nearby hardware store in addition to the graveyard. So now the town of Ironmills wanted this phenomenon removed, and this is where things start getting political in nature. We were called first because we were from the kingdom of Vespucci. More experienced hunters would be coming in from either the Triple Alliance in the south, the Northern Forest in the north, or from the Empire of the Seven Cities in the east. King Walker didn't trust anyone from the Seven Cities, and anyone from the Triple Alliance or the Northern Forest would be under heavy scrutiny, so no hunters that Iron Mill contacted before us were willing to make the trip into the kingdom of Vespucci. I know we weren't Iron Mill's first choice, nor even their fifth choice, but we were the ones who showed up. We were more investigators than hunters, but we had some luck in the past removing spirits. Set also had membership in the Hunters Guild, so he said if we had to, he could pull some strings and try to get a more experienced hunter to take over if it was too much for us. While I don't know what strings he was talking about, I could guess they were copper, silver, and gold. The kingdom of Vespucci obviously hated the Seven Cities, but even King Walker wasn't going to turn away from gold and silver. But we were going to leave that as an absolute last resort. In a world full of beings like the Red Prince, Ghost Hunter, Mach 5, and even that new player in Isle City, people like my team and I struggle to even get the bottom of the barrel requests. More often than not, we were paid to investigate houses and libraries as anniversary presents, birthday parties, and once as a bachelorette party. Money is money, and we were thankful for it, but it makes it a lot harder to be taken seriously when most of your references were drunk when you were doing the investigation. We did also get lucky around October when everyone was preparing for Samhain and wanted to get spooked out. Those were generally better. We actually investigated haunted locations, and once or twice we removed the spirit. So that was probably how Ironmills heard about us. So this was our real chance to move up in the world and start being treated seriously. I was already thinking about all the new jobs we could be doing with being asked to investigate the Winchester Mansion on the West Coast, or the Murder Castle, or the tunnels under Port City, and so much more, and they would be paying us to investigate, not us paying them to be tourists. But I had to focus on doing the best job we could do here before we start investigating the murder castle. The town was about what I expected for a modern mining town. We passed by numerous shops for mining supplies. Everything looked worn down, but not broken down. Things changed slowly in Ironmills, but they did change. We passed several diners that looked like they were built in the year 2700, and probably were. On the West Coast, such diners would have been appealing to a sense of nostalgia, with the old-fashioned architecture and the dog cart food. But here in Ironmills, it just never updated the architecture, and the only thing that changed on the menu was the prices. Wow, they sure don't make places like that anymore, Set said, pointing out the diner. He was dressed how you expected someone in his profession to dress. He had long hair down to his shoulders and tattoos all along his arms and chest, and he dressed in all black. He was also the oldest of us all, but he still wasn't that old. Maybe a bit past 30. Psyche only scoffed. Yeah, we have building codes now. He turned back to her while I kept driving, and I could tell this was going to be a thing. What, you don't feel nostalgic for the 2700s? The neon, diner, and the clothes? Psyche only lifted two fingers in response. Rude gesture. Not my lifetime, not my nostalgia. Hell, it wasn't your parents' lifetime. How are you nostalgic? Psyche asked. Old soul, Set said, which only brought a laugh from the entire van. Nostalgia for old diners or no, Set was definitely not an old soul. His mobile games on the phone definitely proved he wasn't an old soul. Maria in the back was running last-minute tests on the cameras when we finally drove up to the mayor's house. A single-story home with a white picket fence that needed a new coat of paint. But his lawn was immaculate, and when we parked in the driveway, he came out to the van. Clearly, he hadn't slept very well the last few days, with the bags under his eyes and his disheveled clothing. He knocked on the window, so I rolled it down, and he started talking. Forgive this breach in manners, but we are desperate. The haunting is getting worse and worse. There's now a hum that everyone can hear at night, no matter where they are in town. That started last night, but it's making it hard for everyone to sleep. How long has the haunting been happening? It started about 6 months ago. At first, it was just electronics wouldn't work in the graveyard, but now no one will go near it, nor the hardware store. It isn't locked, and the activity usually gets worse at 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. What occurs during that time? I asked. I knew it was the witching hour, so that wasn't that unexpected to escalate at that time, but knowing what it is would help. Figures wander from the graveyard and they come down the streets. Anyone who isn't inside their homes at that time isn't seen again. The mayor looks me directly in the eye and grabs my hand in desperation. Get rid of these monsters. This is a good town and these ghosts are going to ruin us, he said before letting go of my hand. I slipped the paper he left in my hand to set next to me as we drove to the graveyard. Once we got enough distance from the mayor, I asked Set what was on the slip of paper. He peered at the paper and tilted his head. They're watching us. They're always watching. He must be very paranoid. Spirits don't normally wander far from where they are hunting, especially not in the daytime. Do you feel anything, Psyche? Set asked her. She shook her head in response. No spirits as far as I can feel, but he isn't even being paranoid either. He didn't feel like he had paranoia. This feels like a natural fear and response. If anything, he isn't being paranoid enough with what he is feeling. I think he saw something and he didn't believe his eyes, so this isn't going to be some random poltergeist, but something different. Any idea what it could be? He asked Set, who only shook his head in response. No clue. Nothing jumps out at me, but maybe with some of Maria's equipment, we can get a better clue. I think we should start in the Ironwood Cemetery, Set suggested as Maria continued her work on her laptop. We drove first to the hardware store, simply named Hardware Store. The door was unlocked. The inside of the store was rows upon rows of tools, nails, and lumber. The lights above were off, and we took our flashlights out. Everything seemed pretty normal. The temperature guns we had displayed no sudden changes in temperature. Ghosts usually left areas colder than they should be normally, but everything in the store was within 5 degrees of the outside temperature. So instead, we had Maria set up her cameras, or IR cameras, sometimes called night vision cameras, but it wasn't technically true since it was designed to detect not just visible light, but also infrared and ultraviolet spectrums. It would even emit ultraviolet light if there was absolutely no light at all. A personal creation of Maria's. She called them her ASCs, all-seeing cameras. The ASC would record in visible light, infrared, and ultraviolet, all at the same time, and keep up to 30 hours of footage on a flash memory, while also streaming the footage back to Maria's laptop in the van and to an off-site server. The cameras even had an analog tape, which could record up to 2 hours of footage. Maria said it was because she had a theory that analog tapes may be able to pick up on phenomena that flash memory just couldn't. That tape wouldn't be triggered automatically, however. Maria would have to just choose to trigger it from her laptop. Setting up 3 ASCs in the hardware store, we made our way outside to check out the cemetery. The Ironwood Graveyard was surrounded by trees that marked it and gave it its namesake. The gates were old cast iron, lightly rusted, but nothing wrong with them. We drove around the perimeter, and the iron gates and fences guarded the entire graveyard. There were no gaps as far as any of us could see. Both Set and Psyche agreed that was strange. Iron was really good at keeping spirits contained. Still, looking over the cemetery, despite the warm autumn air, I felt a shiver roll down my spine. Psyche paled when she looked into the graveyard. Something very evil lives in that place. It knows we're here, and it isn't afraid of us, Psyche said, while Set and I stared into the graveyard, trying to figure out what it was she was looking at. But everything we saw looked normal. But even so, I felt like there was something we were just missing. Maria didn't seem affected as she just went on her way, setting up her ASCs along the exterior, looking inside. While she did that, the rest of us prepared to go inside of the graveyard. It was our first round of investigation, done during the day. We usually did our best investigating at night, but it would be foolish not to set up equipment during the day as well. Sometimes you ran across something interesting during the day. As we went inside the graveyard grounds, I felt a chill run up my entire body, and Set and Psyche felt it also. We quickly checked our temperature guns, only for them to confirm it was the same temperature inside the graveyard as it was outside. That was very odd. Anomalous infrared fluctuations was one of the most reliable forms of evidence we got for ghostly activity. Even if it wasn't ghostly in nature, then a temperature shift was the only thing that could have explained our shivers. There was no breeze, and for some people, it might be psychosomatic, but with our level of experience, we were unlikely to feel it just because we were scared. So there must be another phenomenon at play. We traveled deeper into the graveyard when I nearly stepped on our next piece of evidence. There was a white flame that was sprouting from a grave. It was roughly the size of a fist, and despite touching the grass, it didn't burn anything. Set, Psyche, have you two ever seen anything like this before? I asked as I took a few pictures of the phenomenon. It reminded me of a will-o-wisp, but I wasn't used to one being so close to me. It wasn't the normal graveyard gas either. Sometimes bodies would produce a gas that would ignite when it reached the air. More than a few times we investigated ghost lights only to realize it was just graveyard gas when it was leaking out of the body. However, such phenomenon usually ignites the grass around it. But there was no heat coming off of it, as far as I could feel. A quick glance from the temperature gun only confirmed that the plasma was the temperature of the graveyard around it. It isn't a ghost orb. They burn cold, not room temperature. It isn't a normal phenomenon either, because then it would be burning. Do you think it has thoughts? Set asked to Psyche, who closed her eyes and shook her head. No, there's no intelligence and no emotion behind that. It might be non-thermal plasma. It is the right color, but if it's non-thermal plasma, those can only be artificial in nature, and I don't see an apparatus for that. Plus, I don't imagine anyone in this town would go to that much effort for a hoax, Psyche said after opening her eyes. It wasn't unheard of for people to run pranks, to act like a place was haunted, and even for investigations, people would like to play pranks. Quite a bit of the time, locals would mess with the investigation, even in the cases of actually haunted locations. But like Psyche said, this was way too much effort, and there was no way anyone in town had the technology to make non-thermal plasma without an apparatus. It would be like trying to send a text on a literal brick. Conversely, however, none of us even knew of a ghost that was supposed to make non-thermal plasma. Cold fires generated by ghosts were endothermic by nature and sucked heat out of the space around it. So, if it was a ghost that made this flame, it was a ghost that none of us has even heard about before, which was even more exciting. And I could see the same smile on Psyche and Set's faces that was forming on my face. It was one thing if this allowed us to move up into the big leagues, but the discovery of a brand new species of spirit, that was the kind of thing that would keep us in the big leagues. We wouldn't be applying for membership to the Hunters Guild, they would be reaching out to us. So, now confident, we now traveled further into the Ironwood Graveyard when we ran into our next phenomenon. I first noticed my phone wasn't working, and then my temperature gun was only giving infinite readings before going blank altogether. I then tried my flashlight and camera. Both weren't working. Even when I replaced the batteries, they wouldn't turn on. And it was the same thing with Psyche and Set. All of our tech was non-functional. I checked the disposable camera I carried and it worked. So whatever this was only affecting electronics. I looked back at the others. Do you want to go back or keep going? I asked them. I knew I wanted to keep going, but I also knew the importance of being on the same page with my teammates. If they wanted to go back, I would never go on without them. But I had a feeling they needed this win just as badly as I did. Are you kidding me? Never seen anything like this before. I'm not backing down. You? He directed the question to Psyche, who shook her head. After all this, I want to see it, she said. I nodded and we continued deeper into the graveyard as it got darker and cooler. It wasn't even noon when we arrived at the graveyard. Even though our phones were non-functional, my wristwatch was still working. It was barely noon, but still it was without a doubt getting darker and darker without a single cloud in the sky. Another unknown as I took another picture of the surrounding area with my disposable camera. We stopped moving, but it kept getting darker. I looked around and I couldn't see any source for the darkness. Any idea what is causing that? I asked my comrades. They were silent, so I turned to face them. Both Set and Psyche were wide-eyed and staring up into the sky, so I turned my face up to the sky as well, and saw what they were seeing. It floated just 20 meters in the sky. The shape was vaguely like an egg, but the color was all wrong. A dark, almost matte black. It wasn't too large, maybe the size of a city bus. There were, however, no lights, no noise, but it still hovered in the air just above us, blocking out the sun. There were no symbols nor identifying marks, but looking at it, I got a sense of wrongness. That wasn't supposed to be something you were supposed to see. I was supposed to be dealing with ghosts, not aliens. But now, so much of it all made sense. Strange noises, tech failing, the fact that they were traveling and even moving around at night. They weren't ghosts confined to one area, but aliens moving around. But what were they looking for? I wondered to myself as I lifted the camera and took another photo, only to hear a choking noise come from behind me. I turned to see both Set and Psyche in the grip of something. It was tall, 2 meters tall, and it lifted both Psyche and Set without difficulty. The skin was moist-looking and smooth, like an amphibian. It was a dark blue that reminded me of a poisonous frog, and the face was vaguely human, but it had no eyes and a very small nose. But the mouth split the bottom of its face, and the sharp teeth were visible even when it closed its mouth, much like an anglerfish. But the outfit it was wearing was familiar. The same disheveled shirt and tie as the mayor from earlier. The creature had a hissing laugh before it spoke in the mayor's voice. I told you, they were watching. But don't worry, I won't kill them. They're too useful. You, on the other hand. More of the fearsome figures appeared from nowhere. Whatever illusion keeping them hidden dispelled as three more stepped forward, their smiling mouths clearly hungry. You will make a fine dinner, the creature said. I sprinted down the path towards the van. I ran with everything I could. I could hear the snapping teeth just a few meters behind me, but as I ran as fast as I could, I couldn't help but wonder why they weren't chasing me quicker. They all had much longer legs than me, so it would be easy to keep up and even surpass me, but they didn't seem to be in a rush. I made it to the van and Maria was nowhere to be seen, but the driver door was open with the keys in the ignition. I called out for Maria a few times, but she was nowhere to be seen and she didn't respond. They must have taken her. I jumped into the driver's seat and started to drive before the door was even closed. But as I drove through town, whatever illusion was over the town faded. I saw that every house had busted down doors and windows. Cars were left broken on the side of the road, and most disturbingly, there were no people, living or dead. Every single person was just gone. But I did see more of those creatures. They stared at me eyelessly, but still, their heads turned to follow my van. The van was warded to keep out spirits and fae, but I am pretty sure it won't work on these creatures. But I still kept driving out of Ironmills. I left my teammates behind, but what these creatures probably didn't know was that I wasn't returning alone. Whatever they wanted more people. Well, I would be returning with more people and more help. Screw the politics, screw the murder castle. I don't care if we have to perform at kids' birthday parties for the rest of our lives. If it saved my team, I was going to do it. When I made it 40 kilometers from the town, I accessed Maria's laptop, which, thankfully, was still functional and still connected to the internet. These aliens must not understand the importance of sight, since they left all of Maria's cameras intact. Still, though, I had a more urgent matter. The police were clearly taken, so I sent out what information I could to a journalist in the Seven Cities, and also sent the information to Set's contact in the Hunters Guild. The only response I got was coordinates for a nearby motel and a date. Set's hunters friends would be here soon, and we would be returning to Iron Mill.